Advertising might be returning to its heyday. Starting with the vaunted Mad Men era of the 1950s, brand advertising enjoyed a half-century of pure artistry, creativity, and bold risk-taking. With only a few national media outlets competing for consumer attention, breaking through was easy if you could afford it, and few companies could. The advent of the internet and e-commerce in the early 2000s changed all that. The barriers to launching new brands disintegrated, while the number of avenues to reach people exploded. Ever since, marketing became more about math and science, less about art. Bean-counting CFOs loved it because they could track the performance of every dollar. CMOs studied too a new test, solving for fancy lingo like incrementality and attribution. And while that math and science is still crucial, it's certainly what our business is about, it also feels like we've reached a point of equilibrium. The tools for optimizing the performance of marketing campaigns are ubiquitous. The gains from math alone are marginal. And at the same time, today's consumer is looking for more. We want emotional connections to the brands we buy, a sense of community and aligned values. It's all ushering in a renewed era of brand marketing that rewards the creative and the bold. My guest today is Craig Brommers, the Chief Marketing Officer of American Eagle. Few brands are thriving more right now than his. Craig and I talk about the brave leaps the company has taken, from Sydney Sweeney to Martha Stewart to country music, and how it drove record sales growth over the last year. We talked about how American Eagle is building customer loyalty beyond single campaigns, and how they're positioning the business for the coming disruptions of AI. We also talked about our neighbors, our jewelry, and why everyone should live on campus in college. So put on your creativity hat and listen to the intrepid wisdom of Craig Brommers and me, the dumbest guy in the room. Craig, it's so great to see you. Where are you joining us from today?
You know what? I am home today. I'm outside of New York City in Greenwich, Connecticut. So, dude, where is spring? We just can't quite catch a break in this neck of the woods. But yeah, home today.
Well, we've been on the sort of 80 degrees one day, 30 degrees the next run for about 2 weeks, which is both maddening and a little bit better than what it was in February. How often do you make it here to your flagship home headquarters in Pittsburgh?
I'm there at least once a month, John. So at least 50% of my team is based in Pittsburgh. I love going to the Burgh. I've become a Steelers fan. I've gone to some Pens games, enjoyed some of the great restaurants there, love the vibe in Pittsburgh, and we get out there once a month.
Well, for somewhat obvious reasons, there are a lot of connections to Pittsburgh from our among our guests. But this year, it's in particular, almost everyone. Michael Costello, who's the CEO of GNC. GNC is based here, although he bounces back and forth from Miami. We've had Mark Cuban, who's a well-known Pittsburgh expat. Perry Sook, who runs Nexstar. Yeah, so somewhat coincidental that this year there's been so many people with Pittsburgh connections. But another interesting one is that you're the second guest that I will have had in this season that I met at the same party in the south of France in Cannes. So definitely different weather than we were having when we met there. But will you be making it back to Cannes this year?
I assume so. Word has it that we had quite a year and that some of the work may get recognized. So let's see how everything plays out. But I know it's been a long time coming. I guess, you have to wait for all the good things. So finally, here we are today together.
You teed it up perfectly. You guys are on, what has to be considered a heater. You had record 2025. You had a record 2025 holiday. You've got analysts upgrading your stock, all the things. How do you explain it? And feel free to take as much credit as you want.
Yeah, it's definitely all me, John. There's no doubt about that. I joke that I've had a long career. I've made my way through the American Mall. I've been in this seat, not just at American Eagle, but at Gap, at Abercrombie, at Calvin Klein. And so I do know that there are twists and turns for any retail brand. And I actually think what unleashed us in the back half of 2025 was actually a quite challenging first quarter of 2025. And I think that kind of allowed us to say, you know what, we need to do something a bit different and shake this thing up a bit. And obviously with the back-to-back success of Sydney Sweeney's campaign, Travis Kelce collaboration, the plot twist of bringing Martha Stewart as the face of a Gen Z retailer during the holidays, and then this country moment that we're living through in spring of 26, I really think it was, again, a little sense of, I don't know if I want to say failure, but a sense of we can do better and we will do better. And what's it going to take? And I think that allowed all of us to come up with some ideas that have certainly been culture defining over the course of the last 9 months or so.
You weren't the only by any stretch at all, particularly first quarter and retail second quarter. We saw across a lot of categories of retail that we track a very palpable slowing in discretionary spending, maybe not quite as steep in apparel as we saw, say, in like certain categories of home goods. So you were by no means alone in confronting some of those headwinds or at least dealing with the consequences of those headwinds. So the opportunity was there for anyone to kind of make those same kind of bold moves. But you don't just decide, hey, I'm going to do something bold and it works. Was there a recipe or something? And, if you don't want to give away too many trade secrets here, I fully appreciate it. But is there a through line in those successful campaigns that you see that really contributed? Because I don't think it would be a disservice to suggest that each one was lucky after the first one. There had to be some sort of through line or philosophy that guided those that have made them all in succession as successful as they've been.
I love that question, John. And I've long said that retail is entertainment. And when I think about what's defining entertainment today, I actually think that streaming is defining entertainment. And I've had the privilege of sitting on the CMO Council of Netflix. And as I was thinking about how they program their shows, I was wondering if we could take some of those learnings and apply it to a retail brand. And so when you think about your favorite streaming show, you're tuning in for your main characters and your main plot. But what keeps you coming back is the stories moving forward. You have guest stars that come in. You have plot twist. Every once in a while, you have a WTF moment where your head snaps back and said, what did they just pull off? I did not see that coming. And I wondered if we could apply that to the American Eagle brand. And I think kind of we have. I think that when you think about where this cultural momentum started with the Sydney Sweeney Has Great Jeans campaign, that's probably the most equivalent of a WTF moment. And then announcing the Travis Kelce collaboration the day after the royal couple were engaged is the plot twist that no one saw coming. And then you bring in Martha Stewart to, again, be the face of your holiday campaign. It's a guest character that makes a lot of sense, but also is kind of interesting. You know the whole world is waiting for what you're going to put down next as you get into spring of 26. And we understood with our friends at Spotify that now the most listened to genre for the American Eagle customer is country. We've never done that before. We've never been in country music before. So why don't we do that? So I think it's just this idea of how do you create storylines that people continue to come back to? And I've actually said it to my team is I want the world to be on the edge of their seat when they say, what is the next AE campaign? And so far, I think we've had a pretty good track record.
Well, you're definitely, again, as I said, you're on a heater. That's a lot of pressure, right? Streaks are meant to be broken. So you've got each successful one raises the stakes of the next.
And I think it also raises the stakes, John, in our industry. I think Gap is having a moment. Abercrombie and Hollister are not going to sit back. Urban Brand apparently is having some success if you watch their earnings. Levi's had a big moment during the Super Bowl. I know many of the CMOs at these companies. They're all great CMOs with talented teams. And so I think it's actually a really fun time to be in retail right now. I think we're pushing each other's, we're pushing ourselves. And you actually have quite a few companies that are doing well out in the marketplace. But you better believe it's competitive as well. So, someone does something, we pay attention, and they're like, okay, how are we going to top that?
Yeah, and as long as it's not taking turns eating bites of hamburgers on camera, then you'd be a little more creative.
Not going to see me do that, right?
Yeah. I know you and I are on the board of directors of the Corey Marchesotto fan club. And, one thing I've had her both on the podcast, but I've talked about this on stages in the past as well. what I've admired about what Corey has done with, I think of like her Liquid Death collaboration, or Jennifer Coolidge as Jennifer Coolidge is to Elf, I think what Martha Stewart is to American Eagle. And I think there is a through line there that a lot of marketing executives listen to, and retail executives listen to this podcast, is that sometimes I think there's an inclination to form partnerships, find celebrity spokespeople, whatever, that are super central and super core to your existing customer. And that it's intuitively makes a lot of sense. You want to be very careful not to go too far outside of that, but also the benefit of reaching somewhat outside of that zone, right? That there's that surprising element, as you mentioned, and it does allow you to sort of expand your fan footprint a bit to go a little bit off the beaten path. So yeah, kudos to you in doing that.
And I think that's right, by the way. And I hadn't really thought of it that way before. We have done things that you would expect a Gen Z retailer to do and do them very, very well. And I know I'm picking a lot on the talent campaigns, and that should not define us, but just getting Sydney Sweeney was news, right? When we announced the campaign, the stock went up 25%. Travis Kelce, obviously, that's just news. And so I guess there is an element of surprise and an element of, oh yeah, I get that for AE. It's a little bit more of a clever entry, but I do still get that. And I think that Corey and Elf have done a great job. And I think our team has done a nice job recently with that.
Yeah. So let's talk about how you're measuring success. And it's easy when your numbers did what they did, right? Last year. The kind of, the trend over the last, 20 years with the advent of e-commerce, the advent of the internet, frankly, the real or illusion of attribution and measurability in marketing has, forced a lot of of brands' marketing investments in much more into sort of the so-called performance category and less so in the brand category. Kind of conventional wisdom today is sort of the average retailer consumer brand is spending about 85% of their marketing dollars on so-called performance, and the other 15% is on brand. The other conventional wisdom is a lot of that is being driven by CFOs who want to see immediate measurable return on every dollar that they spend before the next quarterly earnings. And those are my words, not yours. So I'm not going to ask you to say the same, but I am curious to know how you think about that mix, because those campaigns you've had, which I'm sure had significant performance elements to them, were very much big brand building campaigns. So how do you think about the balance between those two things? Or do you think about the balance between those two things?
Well, I think at the end of the day, as a grizzled veteran of retail, I have to realize that the only way I continue to sit in any of these seats is ultimately driving incremental profitable revenue. But in order to do that, the mix has to be built to optimize the company that you're at. And as I think about the moats that we try to build in a hyper-competitive arena, not just with your typical mall-based brands, but literally everything under the sun, right? Brand is one of them for American Eagle. Brand is one of them for Aerie. And so we have to and need to invest in building those brands. And it's interesting because when I joined the team now roughly 5 years ago, we were leaning harder into performance. And I think if I'm not going to share the exact numbers for obvious reasons, but fast forward to today, whether it's using more sophisticated marketing measurement tools or just using our gut, is actually we're investing more heavily in brand than we were than when I joined the team. And I don't love this question anyways, because I feel like brand drives performance and performance drives brand. As I make the rounds to some of our advertising partners, whether it's Google, Meta, TikTok, or others, they're all saying the same things these days, is that when brand is working well, performance will be more efficient. When performance is working well, brand is going to be healthier. So I think it really is those two working in concert with each other. But listen, I do have the benefit in our case here at American Eagle of having the chairman and CEO, Jay Schottenstein, whose family founded this company, who is in it for the long haul. We are a public company. And so make no mistake, we want to answer to the shareholders, answer to the street, and obviously derive value for our investors. But the great thing about Jay is that we don't have to make those decisions based on the day, based on the week, based on the month. You're constantly looking at short, medium, and long-term payback. And I think that the campaigns that we've been talking about and we've been investing in are going to pay off. And we do see these long tail metrics lifting. And again, just reflecting back on my own career, I've had the privilege of contributing to marketing organizations where brand is, if not first, brand is very important. And I think that that, again, is a competitive advantage in this world where so many of these ultra fast fashion or D2C or even Amazon and Walmart are attempting to compete with us.
I want to just challenge half of your statement about the brand and performance relationship. Very much brand can drive performance, full stop. Performance can drive brand, but it doesn't always, right? And that's, I think, maybe where it can be. Performance can happen for reasons other than brand. Performance can happen because of a switching cost, right? It could happen because of convenience. It could be performance could happen for lots of reasons, or just simply a race to the bottom on price. So it doesn't always, and that's a segue to another topic I wanted to bring up. So we're going to publish a paper hopefully in the next month. We've been working on it for 5 months. We found in our data, and this was really fascinating kind of discovery, and I think something of a bombshell in our collective world, and certainly yours, where the various metrics of what we would call brand loyalty had been in secular precipitous decline for the better part of a decade. Makes a lot of sense. The advent of the internet, the optionality, the promiscuity it affords, so on and so on and so on. And it was just so much easier to switch and move around brands, right? So that was truism number one. Truism number two is that brand loyalty is typically a condition associated with an older consumer. Someone who has spent sowed their brand oats throughout their 20s and 30s, and they settled on those things that they've chosen, and they kind of stick with those things, right? The third dimension of it is sort of the distinction between what I'll call behavioral loyalty, which is I buy the same thing every month, which is the end objective, and then emotional loyalty, which is like, no, I actually have some connection to this brand beyond the fact that it's easy or cheap or convenient for me to buy, right? All of a sudden, since 2021, we have seen a significant increase in the percentage of consumers who we would characterize as attitudinally loyal. Meaning not just I buy the same thing over and over again, but I have an emotional connection to a multitude of brands, but generally never more than one or say maybe two in the same kind of vertical category. So that rise is headline number one. Number two is that rise is happening almost entirely among young consumers. So completely flipping on its head. And it's actually declining a little bit among older consumers. So the true emotional attitudinal loyalty among young people for brands like on a meteoric rise over the last 5 years. So I'd love to hear your kind of reaction to all of that, but I would start by asking the question of how do you think about you've got campaign after campaign after campaign. You've got to keep kind of priming the pump and driving the sort of surprise, whatever the next big campaign. How are you thinking about building longer term loyalty with these consumers so you're not begging for your supper every quarter, every holiday, every new product release? How do you think about that?
I love the findings of this paper. Can't wait to read it because it really does tie to what we've seen in our business over the last couple of years. Our loyalty sales penetration continues to go higher and higher and higher. And from what I can gather is now industry leading. And so there has to be something more than just the product. There has to be something more than just the promo of the day. You can imagine a company of our size and scale. We do quite a bit of consumer insights. And the one thing you do hear about both of our brands, both American Eagle and the Aerie brand, is this attachment to what the brands stand for. And I think in a world where Gen Z is feeling more isolated, they're feeling more lonely, they're feeling potentially more confused. I was blown away by some very recent research that we got back that basically said that when Gen Z walks into our stores, they feel this proverbial warm hug. They feel like our store associates are helping bring out their best selves. And I think that was pretty profound. It wasn't that these jeans fit the best or whatever it was. It was literally an emotional connection to those store associates. And so there is something about that deepening of loyalty, especially at this moment of potential mental crisis for Gen Z, that will allow us to be more successful with them on an ongoing basis. And again, I guess I'm going back in my mind to it's a storyline that we're building, and a storyline is not climactic every moment, right? There's going to be a moment where you just love the main characters and you love the main plot line, and for us, that'll be jeans, and people will love to wear those. So, but the loyalty thing is interesting because I definitely saw the opposite at my time at Abercrombie and Gap in the 2010s. So it is racing back. Part of me is not surprised, but I do find it fascinating.
Well, I think it's and you hit the nail on the head. I was sitting there wondering that I like share a draft of this paper with you because you kind of like played my own words back to me a little bit, which by the way, we're pitching it for me to present at Cannes. We're super jazzed about it. We think it's like, because it makes it back to the sort of brand versus performance debate or whatever. It really does make a super strong case for investing in brand for long-term CLV, right? That long-term value, particularly of that young consumer, because it is very much an emotional connection. And I think you're spot on. And I do actually think this is very kind of sad. And as a parent of, a 19 and 22-year-old girl, like I see kind of the social isolation kind of dynamics, maybe not so much of them, because I'd like to think they're all right, but like around them. It is very much like these brands are filling an emotional void left by some mix of like institutional distrust, friend distrust, media distrust, whatever. So it's like the fact that these brands are kind of forming this type of relationship with people is a little bit weird to me as an old Gen Xer, but it's very much what's happening. And you can't deny the role that social media is playing in allowing that to turn into a sense of community and all of that, which is fantastic. Oh, and by the way, I think this is a good segue to this question, in fact, is when we think back to like, at least my heyday of like going to the mall as a, grungy 16, 17, 18
You and me
year old.
both, John. You and me both.
Right. Like I think we had fewer, it's easier to be loyal when you have fewer choices, right? Like the fact that this is happening now when kids have more brands than any of us could even possibly list, like in our business, it's tough. Like we can't track every single brand that exists. It's just that there's too many of them. It's like tracking every celebrity that exists. So it's like, I understand loyalty when you have a far fewer, you basically were deciding between Adidas, Nike, and Puma at the time, right? Now, whatever. So the fact that this loyalty is spiking when it is I think even more remarkable. So you mentioned Calvin Klein, Abercrombie. So basically like cultural icons of the last 30 years of retail, maybe more, right? Having gone through that time, what kind of marketing truisms of say 10, 20 years ago are now pretty much extinct? And what things have you found that over the course of time and over the course of all this technology and innovation and change that is still a tried and true fact as much as it was when you started? And you can answer those in whatever order you want.
I love it. I would think in the extinction, a couple of things come to mind. One is this idea that a campaign is set it and forget it. Every hour of every day we're on. And I think that reflecting back on the Sydney Sweeney campaign, it's a great example of you had to day by day, hour by hour, evolve how the campaign was coming to life as you were reading and reacting to the moment that we were in. I think back in the day, I kind of joked, you'd take 5 pictures, you place your double page spread in Vogue, you put up that billboard in Soho, and you'd kind of, clap your hands and move on to the next thing. That is absolutely not the case today. I mean, you are always on. And things evolve and things develop and you have to ride that wind. We're doing this right now with our country music campaign. We shot a country singer named Ella Langley in the late November, early December timeframe. We knew that she was going to be performing at Stagecoach, which we had not announced, but can now announce. We are a new partner of. It's the largest country music festival in the world. And she had a song that she just released that people were kind of digging a little bit. But now fast forward today, it's been number one on the Billboard Hot 100 all genre list for at least 4 weeks and potentially more. And we're trying to take full advantage of that opportunity together. I didn't know Travis Kelce was going to get engaged the day before the campaign. So I think this idea, yeah. So the set it and forget it, I think, is something of the past, which I think is very interesting. I guess I'll flip it on to what is so different by saying this is the machine never stops. The machine is in constant need of content and engagement and all the things. Again, back in the day, that just wasn't the case. And that made it quite interesting. I would say also back in the day, what do you think, John? I think that it was more of a one-way conversation. And I think today it really is a two-way conversation. And your community is kind of helping you co-create in real time, probably like you. A lot of Gen Xers watching Love Story, the JFK Jr., Carolyn Bessette story right now. Obviously, she worked at Calvin, and we've had some really good scenes in the series about Kate Moss campaign launching and all this stuff. Now it is so, it's so much two-way that you are launching a campaign, and then in a nanosecond, hundreds, thousands, and in our cases, sometimes millions and millions and millions of people are taking what you've entered into the world and making it their own almost in real time. So that didn't happen back in the day either. And yet it's interesting because I do wonder if some of the things that guys like you and I kind of observed in 90s marketing is coming back. I think that the most obvious thing this season, very likely started by or certainly encouraged by, is the return of sexy. I think that the Sydney's campaign certainly did that. And that as I look at what Calvin is doing with Dakota Johnson, what Lucky is doing with Addison Rae, and I could rattle off some others, you definitely are having a return of some of that 90s inspired sexuality that certainly Calvin and Abercrombie played a very big part in.
Look, I'm a huge music fan, played in a band for 25 years. I'm giant fan. I've had members of the Zac Brown Band on this podcast before, so I'm a big country music fan. Why do you think country's having the moment that it's having right now? From your perch, now getting to know these artists, and you didn't make this decision without a lot of research. As you said, it's the most popular among sort of your demographic, but it's a little bit more than that. Why do you think country's having the moment it is right now?
We asked Gen Z, and it really is around authenticity, realism, and simplicity. I think there is something about country in terms of family, friends, community that really touches Gen Z right now. And it probably does go back to what you and I were talking about a moment ago in terms of this acute need to connect in a world that feels so disconnected. I love all kinds of music, just like you, John. It sounds like there is something that is just simple and authentic and real about much of the country music that is out there. And in the case of Ella's song, Choose in Texas, which is the song I was referring to, that's number one for at least now 4 weeks and potentially more in the future. The interesting thing is it's number one and it sounds like it is a 1970s country song. This is not a pop country crossover. This is not Ella bringing on Justin Bieber to do a duet with her on the song or whatever. This is like grassroots, pure country. Guys, this is a song that doesn't even have a proper music video. So that just shows you the desire of connection and real storytelling. I think that people relate to many of the country songs that are out there right now, from the ups and downs in life to love and to heartbreak to family. And I think that's why you're seeing that this is country phenomenon is not a Southern phenomenon. It's not a Southwest phenomenon. We operate stores in all 50 states. We couldn't do something that was so regional. This is a full-blown national moment. that I think is going to continue for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and in my words, again, not yours, it's also not a red-blue thing, right? My kids are, they steal 3-4 years ago, because I think what countries do feel, what right this moment, what country feels like to me is what nostalgia felt like 5 years ago, sort of like at peak Stranger Things time. Like there was but again, it was just sort of like this pole that I could hold on to in a storm that like just felt safer and comfortable and familiar and familial. My kids are, they were stealing my Nirvana and Sublime shirts 3-4 years ago. Now, like if I brought a Chris Stapleton or Tyler Childers shirt home or something like that, like that's where they've gone. And I think that's exactly right. I think it is more about kind of the emotional vibe around country that really seems to be capturing people right now. And I'm here for it, by the way. Sign me up. I'm all about it. And I'm not actually a big pop country fan. So it's not the pop country that it is that sort of almost like so-called outlaw country a little bit that's vibing. Right. Yeah. That's very cool. Very cool. Well, great spotting it on your side. So I think we just set a record for going a good 35-40 minutes into a podcast, and neither of us has uttered the term AI.
We have to go there, dude.
Do we have to? I know. No, we can't not, because there's one topic around it that I am going to tie back to some of the themes we've covered on. There's this kind of, you're hearing the kind of buzz around this notion of agentic shopping, agentic retail, and somewhere, you've got the retailers that are thinking a lot about it, somewhat worried about it, but also just trying to strategize around it. You've got the media companies, by the way, who are very much freaking out about it because they're like, well, if people aren't actually shopping anymore, who am I going to be advertising to, right? Because, I don't want to sound like a Luddite. I think that we're probably much further away from a reality where agentic retail is as prevalent as some people fear it's going to be, partly because I think a lot of people do actually enjoy the act of shopping. We know it's kind of a gesture of self-care for a lot of people to actually do the act of shopping, particularly in categories they care about where the brands are badges of their identity, like apparel. But I'm wondering, what's your take on it? And where are you on a scale of like, oh, it's never going to happen, to it's some like existential shift in the market? Like, where do you come down on it?
My first reaction, John, is this. As Gen Z's number one retailer, we've observed the truth that a teenager is a teenager is a teenager and will always be a teenager. And what I mean by that is we've never seen store traffic this healthy. So, and I was reading the other day that 75% of teenagers still buy most of their goods in the physical world. That's because teenagers are social creatures today, yesterday, and tomorrow. And so I actually think physical retail, again, tying back to what you and I have kind of talked about today, this need to connect with each other ain't going anywhere. I really don't think so. Now, the ones that are dying don't have a good experience. They don't have strong brands. They perhaps don't have a strong product assortment, and that's going to happen no matter what calendar year it says. But I do actually think that physical retail is going to be very strong for the foreseeable future. Now, having said that, we can't not pretend that there is change happening. I think the most interesting change for me as a marketer is the evolution of discovery. I think that we are going to be in a very interesting moment of, I already see it. I too have two daughters roughly the same age that you do. I'm making broad statements, by the way. I don't hear, I'm going to Google it, Dad, right? So they're going to TikTok, or they're following creators, or maybe their own friends are snapping it to them. And now, they are increasingly looking to ChatGPT and other AI tools. So I actually think in the near future, I think the evolution of discovery is potentially the most pressing matter for companies like mine to get their heads around while we prepare for some brave new world that, I think we're going to probably get there. Is it a subset of the population? Question mark. Over what time horizon? Question mark. I was even thinking the other day for myself, I need to be trying this stuff. I want to be trying this stuff. And then I was like, what part of my life do I want to lease out to someone? Like, I don't know. And I know other buddies of mine who are doing a lot. So maybe I'm a Luddite just like you, John, but I think change tends to be more incremental than we think it will be. I think there is fundamental change coming, and yet there are human truths that I'm going to still believe will be here. And so if you and I were on this pod in 5 years, I would be very surprised if I would not be saying, wow, physical retail continues to be a strong place for a retailer to be, especially a retailer that is engaging with younger people.
I agree completely. There will be parts of today, so-called e-commerce, that will be influenced by agentic, synthetic shoppers going out there for me, but it's not going to replace the social experience of going into a store, the touching and feeling experience of going into a store. I do think it's a bit overblown, but also I think it also reinforces that case for investment in brand, because I'm either going to prompt my agent with it's going to learn the things that I like, and it's going to explore because of prompts that I give it, certain brands that I like it, or it's going to come back to me with some choices, and I'm going to make those choices consciously or not with whatever sort of brand understanding that I've formed. So I think that, again, all the more reason to invest in brand. One thing you said earlier that I want to just echo, so that to make sure that our audience heard it, was the kind of pace of change, the frantic pace of change right now that is very different. Partly it's because we didn't have 24-hour news cycles in the late 90s. We didn't have, massive geopolitical upheaval. Not that we didn't have geopolitical upheavals, but it didn't seem like there was a different one every day that people, and we see it so much. I know you don't know our business all that well, but we have essentially an advertising platform where we bring this kind of sociocultural, geopolitical, economic, real-time data to the audiences we build, because yesterday's data about those things does not matter. What matters is today's data about those things. And it's remarkable. We can be running a campaign that our traders have in field that work for 3 days, and on day 4, it changes. And it changes because of this environmental thing that occurred in the world. It could be gas prices went up. It could be Minneapolis. It could be something not quite as pernicious or political. And so that having your finger on the pulse of culture 24/7 is, so I'm sorry for a little bit of a civic science commercial here, but you were hitting on kind of one of our, big elements of our ethos, is that the world's changing too fast to set it and forget it. So you were spot on with that.
And John, I think that as I look back at one of the reasons why we've been successful, I think we rewired our marketing organization and our marketing processes to move at the speed of culture and move at the speed of Gen Z. And I'm going to be honest, my role as a chief marketing officer has dramatically changed in the last 10-ish years. I think that in the case of places like Calvin and Abercrombie, these were positions of power. You were kind of in a tower, and you were approving this and approving that, and the world kind of followed your lead. And I actually feel my role is now inverted. I'm actually here to support the 250 plus professional marketers that are on the team. And I think that because things are moving so quickly, is that we have to embrace a culture where it's okay to fail. Because if we aren't failing every once in a while, we actually aren't taking any risks. And I think that the exciting thing for our team is that we actually try to celebrate a failure or two every week, as much as we high-five each other for the successes, because in those failures, you find some unlock that helps you to even bigger success down the road. But I would just urge any of our listeners today is you have to have the flexibility, and you have to cut down approvals, and you have to be able to just go with it. And John, I couldn't more violently agree with you that you see the strangest things happening these days in it's a campaign, or it's a promotion, or it's a whatever, because the world is moving so quickly. But that does mean the bat phone rings, and the bat phone is ringing more to the marketing department than ever before. And I think that's also a very exciting time for marketing organizations.
I couldn't agree more. When you said earlier about your peers out there, the sort of like competition that you're having, but also like a friendly kind of frenemy kind of competition. Like they're pushing each other. I think that's a really cool thing to be a part of. You're lucky to have that. Well, Craig, I always wrap these up with a handful of poll questions that are kind of trending in our world of surveying the entire country, and always like to pick a few for our guests to get to know you a little bit better and kind of bring the topics down to a little bit more frivolity. Here's the first question. How friendly would you say your neighborhood is? Now, maybe some of your neighbors are listening, so you should measure your response, but how friendly would you say your neighborhood is?
I think pretty friendly. We have moved quite a bit for job opportunities, and you learn a little bit about yourself and your family along the way. And when we moved to our neighborhood here in Greenwich, Connecticut, we did so very purposely in an area where the houses are actually pretty tightly packed together in order to give our daughters the opportunity to jump on their bikes back when they were younger and go off and explore, kind of how, you mentioned Stranger Things. I mean, that to me, that was my 80s upbringing is, hey, come back for dinner whenever that is. So, that's kind of the neighborhood we live in now. And I'm not going to tell your listeners who it is, but we actually have a quite famous actress that lives on our street. You would never know that she would carry herself as a famous person. It is low key, it is friendly, it is familial, and the people that choose to live here do it for that purposes. There are places that have much bigger lots and all the things, but you're here to have a sense of community.
My biggest nightmare is the neighborhood where there's a neighborhood party every single weekend. You sort of feel obligated to have to attend and all that. So we went the opposite. My wife would say it's probably even a bigger nightmare for her because I'm an extrovert, which is why I don't want that, because I constantly feel terrible for saying no. She's an introvert, so neither one of us wanted it. We live in a rural part of Pittsburgh. Well, not really rural, but we'll just call it a wooded community where when the leaves are on the trees, I can walk the whole way around my house and not see another house. Everyone who lives there for that exact same reason. So I would say we're friendly if I needed something, but not like friendly, like, hey, we're expected to do something together every couple of weeks. But 31% of people say they live in a very friendly neighborhood. 8% say not at all friendly. That sucks. So you should probably move. And then 62% say somewhat friendly. I think we're in the somewhat friendly. Do you own any gold jewelry?
I don't know if a bolo is considered jewelry or not, but I'm in my cowboy era, as we've discussed today, but our eldest daughter goes to the University of Texas in Austin, and the school kindly had me down to speak last year, and as a thank you for participating, I got an official UT Longhorn bolo that I do believe has some gold in it. And I do wear it proudly at football games. So I think that might be the only piece of gold jewelry, if your listeners will give me that.
Yeah, I'll give you that. I don't own any. I've always been a silver/platinum. There's the I don't know.
Me as well.
Yeah. So we're in the 25% of Americans say they do not own a single piece of gold jewelry. I'm definitely in that camp. You're sort of are with an asterisk. I do think a bolo is an asterisk. So 25% say they own many pieces of gold jewelry. Are you planning any major or minor home improvements this year?
I hope not, but it feels like
that's pretty much my answer too.
Yeah, it feels like, surprise, again, here on the East Coast, which I know you guys in Pittsburgh did as well. We had a tough winter, and I wouldn't call it major, but our back porch, there's so much snow and ice that it went up almost to the entire balcony porch area, and it basically ruined the wood on our stairs down into the backyard. So I don't think that's major, but it did require some work over the weekend. So let's hope that is all that we are committed to. Again, my youngest is a junior in high school. She goes to a private school here. My daughter, again, our eldest daughter, in college. These are high cash outlay years, so trying to minimize the problems and the expansions in my house.
You're preaching to the choir. Yes. we've had not just the snow, but we've had these amazing weather events. Just one 2 weeks ago, blew shingles off my roof, blew a thing off of my
Wow.
chimney. Yes, I know another mutual friend and Kate Donovan who will tell you that our little community we live in has been bludgeoned over the last 2 years with week-long power outages. And so, yeah, we can't afford to do the nice to have home improvements. It's just bracing for the must have,
Right.
whatever. Right. Yeah. So 50% of people are planning at least one home improvement project this year, 34% minor, 6. So that's good for Home Depot and Lowe's.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So we're hopefully, fingers crossed, we're in the no bucket. Did you live on or off campus during your college years?
I lived on campus. I was in a fraternity and we were smack dab next to campus. So I guess that is, I don't know if that's legally on campus, off campus, but it was just a walk up a hill. I absolutely loved my college years. I loved to be part of college life, and I wanted to be as close to the action, whether it be academic or other, and loved the chance to have that on campus living experience.
I'm with you. I was on campus all 4 years, also in a fraternity house, and I was really surprised by these results. 50% of college graduates said that they lived off campus during college. Half. 25% did both, so some on, some off. That was a lot of my friends. Yeah.
Yeah. What I've always tried to seek out is unique and interesting life experiences. And I just feel like those 4-ish years are so different from the rest of your life that I would always encourage our daughters, and then certainly one that will listen to me, that, hey, really embrace that. You're not going to have that again.
Right. Well, both of them, I have one graduating after 4 years in Michigan next month, and she's lived on campus the whole time, and I'm glad she has.
Nice.
My youngest is a freshman, and hopefully she ends up doing the same thing. So, yeah, it's cliche to say it was the best years of your life, but it was among the best years of my life, and a lot of it had to do by being immersed in it that way. Yeah. Last but not least, do you generally find cooking to be more of a pleasure or an obligation?
I would say it is somewhere in the middle. I know that's a non-answer.
No, okay. Mix of both is another answer.
It was funny because on the weekends, I would find it more pleasurable. It's a time that my wife and I, and sometimes our girls, would participate in, but it is a nice moment for us to spend. During my work week, I don't know about your work week, I feel like if I can shove a meal in my mouth, I'm lucky. I think yes. The greatest thing that has ever happened to a modern workplace is the flexibility of your whereabouts. Again, I'm talking to you today from my home where I was working earlier. The flip side of that is the boundaries between, your professional life and your personal life blend and blur. I think I've done as well as I can to make that blur work for me, but it's not conducive to a pleasurable, agreeable, let's make a nice long dinner Monday through Thursday. I feel like I am running down the stairs or running to a train to run home. And that's about as lucky as I'll get.
We're like 6 months into empty nesting, and it's changed quite a bit in that I don't have the same expectation to have a meal, or at least we don't have. Of course, the kids had to eat every day. My wife and I have to eat every day, but it's like way much lower pressure. Like we'll cook a few things on Sunday that we're comfortable grazing on for like 3 days into the week and not have to make an ordeal out of it. 31% of people consider cooking to be more of an obligation, 43% a mix of both, and 21% net pleasure. So that's pretty well spread out. So, well, Craig, first of all, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on all the success you've been having. I know you're not spiking a football or anything like that yet because you've got, the clock is still ticking, but I'm really excited to see what the next episode of this show is that you're putting on for all of us, and hope that you just keep stacking win after win after win. And I hope hopefully I'll see you beforehand, but if not, I hope to see you in France and again, and over maybe a Aperol Spritz or whatever it was I drank a lot of last year. Thanks for joining us. I'd love to have you back on again sometime to talk about the next several big wins that you have. And I hope you'll stay in touch.
Thanks, John. Our team will really appreciate those kind words. And listen, in this business, you can go from hero to zero back to hero pretty quickly. So we're going to stay focused, stay motivated, and hopefully give people something to talk about in 2026.